You're listening to the Reinvest Podcast, where each Tuesday we will show you how to reclaim, reconnect, and refocus your life by bringing you the top real estate professionals in the industry. We'll pull back the curtain so you can implement these tools and tactics to build generational wealth. Your hosts, Garrett Gatton and Seth Simonillo. Hey guys, welcome to episode 69 of the Reinvest Podcast. At the time that this is dropping, it is tax season.
Yes. Everyone's kind of bracing for that tax bill. I know I am also bracing for the tax bill. I feel like I didn't plan well enough in 2023, and therefore I'm paying more money than I probably could have. So that's not as fun as I would have hoped it would have been.
Well, and it's a good segue into saying that it's a little too late to make a lot of changes on this last tax year, but it's never too late to strategize and find the right person moving forward. By the time this is dropped, our previous guest is a tax consultant. So find somebody who knows the ins and outs specifically of real estate taxes. Not all CPAs are created equal in terms of the attention and the confidence they have to help you maximize the benefits that are given to you for owning real estate. So we've got a great guest today. You want an intro for her?
Yeah, absolutely. We have Jered Sturm with us from Cincinnati, Ohio. Jered, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. And the tax drop caught me off guard just because we're recording a little bit ahead of time. But I'm like, oh no, did I? But no, yeah, and I'm excited to talk about real estate because on the tax front, I've been fortunate to be a full-time real estate investor for 16 plus years. And so haven't had the burden of taxes very much at all. So we can always dig into that, but
well, that will be a relevant portion of today's conversation, and we can go a lot of ways. So, Jered, that's kind of the thing with you is you've been doing this long enough that we could probably do a dozen episodes on what you've learned or different areas of real estate that you're working or finding success in. But before we kind of get into the main topic for today, who is Jered Sturm? You're a Bearcat, the Flying Pig, you're a Buckeye, hopefully. Confirm that for us here shortly. How'd you get started in real estate? What company do you have? Give us a little context here.
Yeah, thank you. And my story goes back, I said it just a second ago, I've been doing it for 16 years, but my story in real estate starts prior to that. And in high school, I was a terrible academic student. So like the academics just wasn't a fit for me, but we did still have wood shop in my high school and I excelled there. And so like working with my hands and working in trades was always something that interested me during the high school years. And then my senior year, my high school had a program where we could go out and work a full-time job. And I signed up for that program. And I became a maintenance tech for a local landlord here in Cincinnati, Ohio. Now, I didn't know much, so I was the guy who did like eviction set outs, and I would maybe hang blinds and paint turnovers and things like that. But what I was naturally inclined with the trades, and I just always said yes if someone asked me to do something, and slowly built that skill set up. So myself and my brother got a job being this guy's maintenance tech, and then that evolved into friends and family asking, can you fix this? Can you fix that? Which then evolved into, can you redo my bathroom? Can you redo my kitchen? So by the time I was exiting high school, we were doing kitchen remodels, bathroom remodels, and really using our skill set in the trades in that regard. But that prompted us in 2008 to start buying some of those foreclosures. So while we were running a construction company, we were buying really distressed single family houses and nights and weekends going in, fixing those up. And then we decided to rent those out. And for a couple of years, we did both our construction company and our rentals until the rentals started kicking off enough cash flow where we could focus on that.
So why did while you're kind of going through that journey there, because there are a lot of contractors, a lot of construction guys that were operating, had their businesses in 2008. What gave you the nudge to actually become the owner of real estate?
There wasn't anything profound. So like, I don't have this aha moment or this.
I was on a mountain and there was.
But I can tell you, like, no one in my family is entrepreneurial. as I look back on this and have had this question in the past, like what prompted you? I think it was that I was really that bad in school, like academics wise, that I just never got on the traditional path of like call it corporate America. That just was
Yeah.
never for me. So, but I was smart. I just needed to find an alternative. And so I just started looking into like, well, what's my other avenues? And it was like, well, I enjoy working with my hands. How can I use that? Right. And I was very good at making like high end custom furniture and wood shop. But I was like,
Really?
I don't want to compete with IKEA. Like, it's just not of interest to me. So what else can I do? And the trades kind of fell in. And, but I think I was aware enough to say, like, is that the full scope of what I want for my business? And
Mm,
um, it wasn't, because I didn't want to just swing a hammer every day for 40 years. And so I was looking for those
right.
alternatives.
So you started buying some single family houses, rehabbing them. Were you flipping some of them and holding some of them, or just at the
Yeah.
time maybe just holding?
Yeah, at the time we were just holding. And so I know traditional path is usually like maybe do some wholesaling, get enough money, do some flips, and then potentially you can get to rentals. We didn't really take that path. But to give you some context, like this is 2008, 9, 10, 11, right? Houses were much, much cheaper back then. And so we might go do a high end kitchen in a really affluent area of Cincinnati and make $40,000 in profit, and then turn around and we would buy a house for $40,000 at
Mm,
cash and do
mm-hmm.
all the renovations ourselves. This was again that time no lenders were lending, especially
Right.
to a, an 18-year-old that didn't have a W. And so our first eight houses had to be all cash, both the acquisition and the renovation. So that
Oh,
took us
wow.
2 years to do that. But we were very disciplined in our approach to say, we're going to not spend the money that's getting kicked off of this construction company, and we're going to actually redeploy it into these rentals. So
When
we
you
were
say we, what do you mean? Was that your,
myself and my brother. So it's
okay.
still my business partner today. And so, we started the construction company. He was a maintenance tech as well. We've had very similar paths and now run our company together. Um, but yeah, we made the decision that that money was going to go back into buying rentals. And even when those rentals were kicking off cash flow, they were going into buying more rentals. So it was that delayed gratification.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why I had that in my mind at 18, 19, but it was just maybe the way we were raised and just the discipline to get it done. But fast forward, we were buying single family houses, renovating them. That grew into small multis like quads and 10 units. And we were building up our portfolio. The first 8 years of our career, we were not raising any money from outside investors. We just did everything internally funded. Once we got to those eight houses, though, we did find a little local bank that gave us a blanket cash out refinance. And I'll never forget that day because it was so profound. Because,
Wow.
Yeah.
at the time, I think I was 20, and we had eight houses completely free and clear, and they gave us a 60% LTV blanket loan that we had forced a lot of appreciation into these assets.
Mm-hmm.
And getting that check at closing was like, it worked, like this worked. And the wise thing we did though is we
Wow.
didn't go out and buy, super fancy cars or anything. We went out and bought 10 more houses.
Yeah. Wow.
And then it has snowballed from there. And where we sit today is at 1,300 units here in Cincinnati. And most of those smaller, or I should say, all of the smaller ones that we built up over the first 8 years, we have since sold off to focus exclusively on large apartment communities. So that was
You know,
a long-winded way of giving you my background, but hopefully that helps.
no,
Yeah.
that is really good stuff. And we were talking just before kind of going live onto this episode, and I think this is the appropriate time to discuss this. There are a lot of misnomers about real estate, and maybe it's because anytime something gets attention, you have a lot of voices that start to kind of speak on the topic. And as a listener or as an aspiring investor, you have to kind of sift out the good advice from the bad advice and know what you're listening to. So maybe speak to the thesis that real estate is a get rich quick kind of model to build wealth.
Yeah. I guess I'll preface it and say my path is not someone else's path, and that person's path is not the next person's path. And so, like, my story is definitely not one of get rich quick. And I don't think it is for most real estate investors. It
Mm-hmm.
can be. And I think that's enticing. but that's certainly not how it felt for me for a very long time. And so I think the word of caution that I would give to any aspiring real estate investor who is chasing the get rich quick scheme is the majority of the time it takes quite literally the opposite, right? Like it takes being poor for a long time to
Right.
have any traction because you're not taking those paychecks, you're not taking those distributions. And, I can certainly share lots of my own examples of how the first 5 years we took zero distributions out of our company. I was living off of, at the time, my girlfriend's, but now my wife's teaching salary.
She hung in there, huh? Wow.
Hung in there, and she's a teacher now. So
I bet she was. Yeah, she's grateful now.
a wise investor. She was investing in me, but no, but like, yeah. And I remember, going to the thrift store and there was a bin that sold 9-cent t-shirts, and they sold them as rags, right? Because they were supposed to be used as rags, but I was wearing those for work. But
wow, rags to riches. Oh, that's what we're gonna title this episode.
But I would just caution anyone who thinks it's going to be easy, because if you go in with that mindset, or that it's going to be quick, most likely you're going to get wiped out when it isn't. So,
and that advice is not just for aspiring investors. It's to investors that need to stay the course, because you want to look to the left, you want to look to the right, and kind of get a pulse on, like, am I doing well based on what you see going on around you? And you can't do that. You got to keep your eyes down. You got to be able to learn. I'm not saying don't learn from other people, but I find myself in that trap, and I need that advice that you just gave, is work the system long enough and it will pay off.
Mm-hmm.
And for you specifically, it took 8 to 10 years to really start to snowball. And I think that's like a common theme of successful people that I've been listening to, is they're like, man, I was building this for like 10 years before things really took off. And it's kind of when you hit that hockey stick, when you hit that elbow and start shooting up, that's when you get a lot of attention. But that's only part of the story.
Yeah.
So success, go ahead, Jered. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, in those 8 to 10 years, we were aware that hockey stick was coming. So we were building the systems and processes and operations to accommodate them so that it wasn't caught off guard. But it's certainly not as sexy and shiny during that time period, because it's like, I'm thinking about systems and processes, and oh, wait a minute, I got to go unplug this toilet that's clogged because and so it doesn't get as much attention, right? But that's the reality of it, at least for me. That's how I knew how to do it. And there's things now I look back on that I wouldn't do the same, but at the time it was necessary for me to gain the wisdom and the experience to then put me in the position that I'm in today. And how that all translates, and I still think about this quite a bit, is like the advice that you're giving is like, you have to know your own core competency. Like, what are you good at? And whether that's me today at 1,300 units or me buying the first one, like, what I was good at is buying, renovating, forcing appreciation, and then stripping the equity. So our business model on those early houses is no different than what we're doing today on 100+ unit apartment communities. We know what we're good at. We stay in our lane. We just kind of repeat that and have for a long time, just slightly bigger each time.
There's I don't know if it was John Maxwell or somebody in the leadership community kind of talked about like priming the pump, and you've got that old style well pump, and you got to pump the handle. It's bringing it from 50 feet underneath the ground. And so many times you keep pumping and you get tired. And if you stop pumping, the water might be 1.5 feet away from coming out of the spigot. And relating that to what we're talking about, there's that shiny object syndrome. Well, maybe I'm going to go try this strategy because the one I'm doing right now isn't getting the results that I want. And you guys really stayed with the same model, and you got good enough at it that you were able to start to do it at scale. And then the last, probably third or last half of your investment career after this point, it's had disproportionate dividends, from that effort. So I think that's the true of a lot of people if you stick with it long enough. One of the things you guys have been excellent at is operational efficiency. And when you have a portfolio of 1,300 units, that doesn't happen by accident, and it doesn't happen by shooting from the hip and flying by the seat of your pants. So I'm hopeful that we can kind of unpack your guys' systems, the strategies that you're implementing into your apartment communities for your investors, for yourself, that somebody could apply to their context, how do you uncover inefficiencies that would affect bottom line revenue? So I don't know if you want to start by just kind of giving us an overview of SNS Capital, and what does that mean that you guys are excellent kind of in the operational side of things?
Yeah. Thank you. I pride myself on how good we are at our operations and how that impacts the bottom line. And I'll just say, to kick it off, is one of my favorite comments that I make to our investors or other investors who are aspiring to build their own businesses is like, financial returns are supported by the on-site operations of these real estate assets. But what a lot of people miss is the on-site operations are supported by the people who actually work there. And I think I have an advantage of really understanding that statement because of how we've scaled our business. I have actually sat in each of those roles at those properties,
Right.
I've been the guy who's cleaning, I've been the maintenance tech, the leasing agent, the property manager, the regional manager, all of that. But fast forward today, we have 50 employees. We're vertically integrated, meaning we handle our own property management, but we also handle our own construction in-house. So the same business that we were building 15, 16 years ago, renovating, we have carried that forward and have our own internal teams that are renovating apartments, or not just maintaining them, but turning them over and doing renovations. And what we're exceptional at is maximizing the efficiency so the NOI is as strong as possible, which forces those values up, and then doing that with usually a component of property management as well as construction. So when we're finding ways to add value, usually they fall into those two buckets, but there's lots of different levers that can be pulled. Did I answer your original question?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I figured it's going to be a combination of those things in terms of the property management side of stuff. And say again, what were the two buckets that they fall into? You said construction management and property management?
Yeah, just renovations or property management, right? So there are vertically integrated companies that handle their own property like they own the asset and they handle the property management. But as soon as it comes time to renovate the apartment, they call the subcontractor, right? And so we're doing all of those in-house.
Let's talk about property management real quick, kind of pick that bucket and maybe extract out what are some of the levers that somebody could pull within that kind of column of real estate that would affect the profitability of their properties. So maybe it's having property manager software that's going to make them aware of lease renewals that need to happen. It's having data on hand. You mentioned an on-site property manager.
So I think you hit on a few key components there of good software and data, and then how that then translates back to the people who are actually executing the actions to make these things happen. So that, to me, that means KPIs, right? So we track KPIs, or key performance indicators, for specific roles in our property management company so we can hold them accountable and set targets. But, we just went through the change of the calendar year that has budgeting, like we have to do, extensive budgeting for the next year. And so we're always looking for ways to maximize NOI or net income or whatever the target is we're looking at. And so, to your point, or to answer your question more specifically, a lot of times it's every single account on the income statement, right? It's not just one profound one. It's like, well, how can we maximize pet rent, right? Or how can we decrease utilities slightly by installing this different toilet or this LED lighting or this different faucet, shower head, whatever, and all of these components then add up. I would say, if you look back to 2008, 9, 10, 11, there was very low hanging fruit where you could say, this rent is 800, it could be 1100, and it was so straightforward.
Yeah.
Days are gone. And so you have to not only hit every account, a lot of times you have to read between the lines to find those opportunities to maximize that NOI. The biggest one, and one thing when we were doing budgeting this year that we were just so aware of and trying to convey to our property managers, is the largest account that has the biggest trickle down effect is vacancy, right? So vacancy then trickles into all these other accounts that either positively or negatively impact your
utilities that on units that you're holding that utility expense for. Yeah.
And so so the advice I would give is know where those big levers are, and then structure 1 to 2 KPIs to hold team accountable to it. So let's use vacancy as an example. Most property management softwares and most investors will track vacancy or occupancy, one or the other, right? That's a common thing. But one thing we do is we break vacancy down into the components of each department that handles it. So I'll explain that as obviously vacancy is from the time one resident moves out to the time the next resident moves in. But you can then break that down to say that from the time the one resident moves out to the time the construction starts, the project manager is responsible for that component. And then you could say from the time the construction starts to the time the construction finishes, right? Those are your tradesmen. Those are our turnover guys. They're responsible for getting it from that point to that point. And then the construction is finished. And then by the time the next resident moves in, that's leasing's responsibility. That's our sales team.
Right.
And so we set targets for each of those components. And I can tell you, like, we average right now, even with 1,300 units, we average 20 days from that first to the last. So move out, move in. And that's with a heavy renovation in the middle.
Wow.
Our leasing team in 2023 averaged 3.5 days from when the construction was finished to when the tenant moved in. And that all plays into because.
Which, can I pause you right there? Like most people probably would not appreciate 3.5 days for leasing is wild. Because, I mean, you could have pictures sit in someone's inbox for, you know what I mean? Like just even getting the information after it's been renovated, uploaded, and that information out there, and then doing showings to a lease signing. That's fast, 3.5 days.
Well, they don't do that. That process would fail. They're actually, the success of the leasing team hinges on the project managers, because what happens is, our lease requires a 30-day notice from the previous resident. So the resident gives notice, I'm moving out on this future date. Right then, the project manager takes that and schedules the construction. Our construction takes currently 3.5 days to completely turn a unit on average. And so we know when that construction is going to finish. So that tells the leasing team, this is the date that you can now pre-lease this to. And because everything is in-house, we have control of all of those dates, and the team has enough confidence in each other that the leasing agent can say to the prospective resident, even though this isn't ready now, 3 months from now, it's going to be ready. Here's a video tour of what it will look like when it's finished. And then we have enough positive Google reviews and things like that to give the prospective resident confidence. So I think it was last year, 68% of our leases were signed on the units before that unit ever even turned, right? So it's all about being proactive and squeezing that down. And so this is I'm drilling into one specific example, but we're using KPIs to direct the people who are actually then trickling up to the financial returns. And that's what makes us good at operations. So it's very easy to say, like, yeah, I'm great at operating. It's like, well, what are your KPIs? What are your targets?
And you can't inspect what you don't expect. So you guys have broken it down to know what to even expect of people. And then you can then monitor in that system. Like most people be like, oh, vacancy. Well, if you're looking at vacancy as one category, you're wrong. There's, so much happening more, within that. So that's really good. So one thing you hit on there that I think is relevant is the asset class ties into the efficiency, because part of the reason that you guys are able to pre-lease 68% of these last year is because you have a lot of uniformity in your properties. It's not like you have a single family house portfolio of 50 different houses. You're able to have that data of like units and this many type of floor plans in this apartment complex. That creates kind of an economies of scale, so to speak. So talk about when you guys are on the purchasing side of things, and that's in the back of your mind. How can we efficiently operate a property? And you have your system in place. What are the construction types of the apartment complexes that you guys look at, the age of the units, how many units that you're looking at to feel like you can achieve the level at which you operate?
So I would say our ideal purchase would be a 200 unit apartment community that has 100 one bedrooms, all the same floor plan, 100 2 bedrooms, all the same floor plan, built in 1990, and the rents in Cincinnati, Ohio are about $1,500. That would be like perfect, right? The more cookie cutter it is, the more systematized and processed and better it falls into our process. Not always possible. So, like,
Right.
our oldest asset was built in 1967. Our newest one, I think, is like 2003. So we're somewhere in there. But again, it goes back to our core competency of adding value through renovation. So we're not buying brand new stuff. We can't,
Right.
like, that doesn't fall into our bucket of being able to add value. But a lot of times where we can add the most value is sometimes in those older assets where, call it pre 1978, some other buyers will defer or shy away from it because the construction component is there's more skeletons in the closet. They don't know what to anticipate, but we know how to speak that language. We can do our due diligence and uncover those things. So I would agree with what you're saying. The more cookie cutter it can be, the more attracted we are to it. But the systems and processes we do now that made us so good at pre-leasing, we learned those when we were doing single family houses, right? So we were doing the same thing. The key is most what I found most important, and this was proven out through COVID, the key is your reputation online. So Google reviews for us were extremely important. So if someone's going to sign a lease and put a deposit down, so often they're leaning on reviews, just like you would if you bought something on Amazon, right?
Right.
And so what we did is we realized that during COVID, and so we went out to our property management team, like our employees, and we said, every Google review that's 5 stars that you get and your name is in it, you get an hour of PTO. And so then we sent basically an army of our team.
Wow.
And we had maintenance techs making their own business cards with QR codes and handing them out. And, like it was just
No way.
so. To your point, like you can do this same thing even if you don't have a 200 unit cookie cutter, 1990s building. If you had single family houses, the key is you got to put up the upfront work to have the reputation. And then the first time you lease that single family house, you got to take a video of it. You got to get good pictures. You got to virtually stage it. So that way, when it comes time to pre-lease it before the resident has moved out, you can gain the trust of someone to sign a lease and put a deposit down on something they've never seen.
That is such a good idea.
Yeah,
the Google review thing's kind of blown my mind a little bit.
But okay, on that, let's just use that as an example because it's a good one. You figured out the Google reviews was going to help establish kind of that preliminary credibility, which was then going to expedite the leasing process. But that didn't ensure you knew how to motivate the people down, in your organization to then go get those reviews. So part of the KPI thing is not just knowing which lever, but then how to pull the lever. So how did you guys come up with the idea for the PTO incentivization? Because obviously it worked.
Yeah, it did work. I mean, I think it's kind of, it wasn't anything profound, right? It was like the squeaky wheel gets oil, right? So
Right.
ask, and then it's like I'm thinking of it from the perspective, again, I've been in their shoes. Like it's awkward to ask, right? Like if you're a leasing agent and you're like, hey, I hope you enjoy your new apartment. And by the way, can you leave me a positive Google review? If there's no reason to do that or no incentive to do that, why would they do it? And I'm willing to put myself in their shoes and say like, well, what would make me do it? Right. And we've had leasing agents that have 80 hours of PTO because they go on 2-week vacation paid because they are asking, but at their hourly rate the cost of that marketing is totally worth it, right? Because we're picking it up on vacancy, which is the largest account that then trickles down into net NOI, which then we're forcing massive value into these. Then we strip the equity by doing a debt restructure or refinance, and then we go buy another apartment community. So that's one of many ways to like kind of see how all the little levers then impact the which would be NOI, which you're always targeting growth on.
So aside from so we kind of talked about the property management side of your guys' company and how you're able to be more efficient. Speak to the construction side. So other than controlling the timeline because it's all your employees kind of under the same roof, what have been some of those things by controlling your own construction? How has it made you guys more efficient?
Yeah, I can share this, but I should give credit to my brother. So I currently have two partners. So there's myself and two more, and our technical titles, I'm CEO, my brother's COO, and my partner is CFO. I think a better way to describe that for listeners is I push the company forward. My brother cleans up the mess that creates with processes. And then Coleman, our third partner, CFO, he keeps track of all of it. And so like that's how we break down our responsibilities roughly, right? But at a 50-person company, it's still, there's lines are blurred, and we help each other out in any way we can. But the credit to the efficiency on operations, both in property management and construction management, should go to my brother, but I'm more than happy to share that story. And I would say we are better at construction management than we are at property management, but I think we're the best property managers in Cincinnati. So hopefully that tells you how good I think we are at construction management. And it all goes to my brother and his ability to process, find efficiencies. And again, we did this for a lot of years. And so one thing we don't do is we don't outsource stuff. So a lot of companies will outsource the carpet or the flooring. You know, they bring in a separate team to do the flooring, or they bring in different painters or they're cleaners. Like, no, it's all in-house, because what we've learned over the years is those transition points is where you lose efficiency and get choppy. You know, the carpet guy didn't show up, or he's sick, and then that throws your whole schedule off. If your schedule's off and your leasing agents then have to talk to a disgruntled resident because we didn't hit the date, then they stop trusting that pre-lease date, and then they start giving themselves margin or delta between, so they don't get yelled at. And so it's like it's all about the efficiencies. And my brother has it down to where our project managers go into these apartments that need renovations. They create what we call an MOI, or a move-out inspection, that creates several outputs, and this is all happening within an app that he built. So it creates a scope of work. It auto translates that to both English and Spanish, in case some of those tradesmen's first language might be Spanish. And then it creates an order to our Home Depot rep, and it also creates an accounting report to our accountants to accelerate depreciation on certain components of the asset that we're ripping out.
Wow.
And then what happens is our tradesmen show up to the apartment, and the goal is to allow them to never leave the apartment, not because we're trying to trap them into jail, but anyone who's been in the trades knows, like, it's a massive inefficiency to drive to Home Depot.
Yeah.
So they don't like doing it. And so on day one, when the tradesmen are doing the demo, pallets show up to the front door of all the materials they need. The project manager is inputting that. We negotiate our pricing on those materials that we use. We do the same thing in every single apartment. And then there's a scope of work that allows them to know exactly what our expectation is. They finish that in about 3.5 days and move on. Our cleaners come in, do a clean and a punch list inspection. We have 5 full-time cleaners. And so all of it's in-house. We can control all of those components, and that's what's so important to us. But what I was trying to remember to say, like, my brother has it down to such a science that when there is a manual of when they unload the pallets, where in each floor plan they should set like the stack of flooring, so that way they don't have to move it again. Right.
Wow.
And so that is a level of efficiency that a lot of tradesmen don't have, but if you can teach it to them, they really appreciate.
Yeah.
Because, you know, when we hire new turn teams, is what we call them, our teams of 4 that renovate apartments, and we tell them, like, we're going to get it done in 3.5 days. They're like, there's no way. And it's like, well, if you don't have to move the materials around 5 times, you actually shaved off 5 hours, right?
So on that note, I had a pretty lucrative career as a floor layer under my father-in-law. I think it was probably to kind of put some brownie points into the piggy bank of marrying his daughter. But he's one of those guys where he thinks through just very logically workflow type stuff. And it was funny because early on, I was the doofus that would unload the box truck with these, big, massive, boxes of flooring. And invariably, I would always set them in the wrong spot. And he would, chide me, sometimes lovingly, sometimes not, about like where. And I'm like, I just get so frustrated. I'm like, Stanley, how is there a wrong way to bring a box of flooring in, And then he would hand me a broom and say, sweep out this room. And then I would sweep it out. And then he'd come through and sweep out, like, I swear he dumped dirt in there and then swept it out. Because I was like, where did that dirt come from? And it just, basic stuff that you think you know that you don't. And then when you're around somebody who's been doing it for a long time, you realize how much waste and effort you're expending that really isn't going anywhere. And then, now I think a little differently. So he's much better. But to your point, that's incredible that you guys have gotten that granular on the construction process and that you've been able to communicate that.
And systematized it.
Yeah. Respect.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And one of the things I'm really proud of is on those turn teams, we have grown them to where now we have multiple turn teams, right? But we have never had any turnover in that. And in anyone who's been involved in the trades knows that's very hard to do.
Right.
They really appreciate it because it allows them to focus on what their core competency is, rather than running materials and trying to think through all that stuff. We give them that process. And I'll give you one more fun example is that my brother is so in tune with this stuff is he's watching one of the turn teams and he goes to monitor stuff and make sure we're running efficiently. And he's looking at it, and on the kitchen counter of this apartment that's wrapping up a turnover, he's like, there's a couple bottles of Gatorade and a few Red Bulls. And he's like, where do you guys get those from? And they're like, well, up at, BP or whatever gas station. He's like, you guys drive there to get those? And they're like, yeah, we drive there to get those. So then from now on, in that material orders from Home Depot, box of Gatorade, box of Red Bull on the top.
That's crazy.
Stop leaving, right? That's the cost of the Red Bull and the Gatorade is significantly less than the loss of efficiency. Because these guys are hourly paid and they're certainly not clocking out to drive to the gas station to get Gatorade, right?
So if I were one of the turn teams, I would stash an empty pizza box and a few other choice items, and in hopes that he would then make that a part of the next turn. So
I mean,
that's funny.
Labor is so much more expensive than these little things.
Yeah.
And certainly those guys are sweet, that's part of
right.
called a perk of the job, right?
Yeah.
But, and we're caffeine, take it.
Yeah.
Work harder and faster.
That's awesome. All right, we're going to jump into our smaller pockets segment here.
All right.
Can I for a second? This is funny because you were on Bigger Pockets, okay? So now this is a redemptive moment for you to tell us a smaller pockets.
Okay.
So anyway, smaller pockets. Go ahead and tell us about one of your worst deals and what happened and what did you learn from it so our listeners can avoid the same mistake.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you put that learn from it part because I really do I've gotten this question in different formats over the years, and I have a hard time answering it because of how I view failure. It's not to say that I don't fail. I fail all the time. How we have gotten good is making a lot of mistakes and then cleaning those up. But I always just see it as that, a way to improve. And so, but early on, the one that stands out to me is we bought a single family house from courthouse steps. We weren't allowed to see the inside, right? So we bought it sight unseen. It was very inexpensive, but this house was clearly a tear down after we got it. It should have been torn down. At the time, we had no idea how to do ground up development. So we were like, we're going to fix it.
Development.
Ended up being truly 6 months of labor. That this is at the time when me and my brother were the ones swinging the hammer, running the wires, laying the plumbing, all that stuff. And we basically rebuilt that house all the way through. And looking back on it, it was a total waste of money, but such an educational component. I learned how to build a house in those 6 months. And through YouTube and failed inspections from the building inspector and just all those things. And so when I look back on it now, I probably made $2 an hour. My rate. But over a 6 month period, I probably made $2 an hour. Maybe.
You did it. You went to the place of calculating what you made hourly. And by the way, most people don't do that when they make a lot of money. They're just this is taking longer. What am I making right now?
Yeah. So making $2 an hour for how hard I worked if you just focus on that, you would say that was a small pockets. But I certainly wouldn't be able to do what we do today if we didn't go through those 6 months because it was such an educational component. And that goes back to how we kind of started this episode is sometimes it just is going to be hard and you're not going to make a lot of money. And that's the beginning, for at least for me.
Yeah.
That was necessary to now put me in a position where the snowball is rolling and there's a lot more momentum.
Yeah, it's awesome.
It's good. All right, man. We're going to go into what we call our little nugget. So, Jered, we've talked about a lot of things here. So I'm going to ask you to give us something different, something we haven't touched on yet. But what's one practical takeaway or a piece of advice that our listeners can implement into their real estate investing businesses? Could be personal development, could be mindset, could be something really tactical and practical. The door's open.
So I think what's applicable to any business, whether it's real estate or it's a 2-person business or 1,000-person business, is like, as a leader, being extremely clear on what your vision is where I have gotten better and I see a lot of mistakes made. And so a lot of times as leaders, we assume people will understand what we're trying to create or what the expectation is.
That is very true.
And so often it's not. Like, that's not how it works. So you have to be explicitly clear and kind of like 10 times more effort than you think it would take to convey that to someone. And that's nothing against them. That's all about just leadership. It's your responsibility to take the upfront time. And so something I did, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the book Vivid Vision. So it's like a book that I read it and it was really good for me, but it was, it tells you to write like a 3 to 5 page document that outlines what your company will look like, feel like, act like in the future. And I took it to a whole nother level. Like, I wrote a business review magazine. So it looks like someone came into our company 3 years from now and did a full magazine write-up on what SNS looks like, feels like, act like from every department, what our corporate office looks like, how people are greeted. And I put images with it and I print that out. I took a lot of time to put that together, and I be happy to share it with you guys and put it in the notes because I have electronic versions of it as well.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
It has been invaluable for directing our team, because really what it does is it tells them when they're interviewing at SNS, we give one out to every single person. We say, look, if you accepting an offer, this is what you're saying yes to, because here's where we're going. And then more importantly, the team members that are on the team, it empowers them to reverse engineer. So what they do is they take that magazine and they can say, oh, here's where we're going. So this, I understand. Now we can work as a unified group in this direction, rather than having very skilled people working in opposite directions. Then they get frustrated, they quit, and they go to somewhere else where they have better guidance, right? So, your question is like, what advice I would give is just take the time as a leader to really outline that vision and create the clarity for the people who are actually going to execute and bring it to fruition.
Let me ask you a kind of, I guess, maybe more of a personal question. This might require some vulnerability. So, on the vision side of things, you are a very humble individual. I can just sense that from you, very down to earth. And so it's been a progress and a journey for you to kind of get to that point of being able to communicate that vision. Has it been hard for you in the past or even currently to recognize maybe when something doesn't go the way that you envision or somebody leaves the company? Is it hard for you to kind of recognize that that's a leadership thing that's with you?
I would say it happens all the time. It hasn't been hard to recognize because I've always put that responsibility on my shoulders. And I think that's why I'll take the time to put in the extra effort to create a little bit more clarity. How can I do this better? How can I convey this better? How can I, but in the going back to the question of small pockets, a lot of the mistakes I have made are surround people, right? Asking them to do the wrong things that don't complement their skill sets or something along those lines. And so I would say if we have a personnel issue that pulls us astray from the vision that I've created, that's my fault, right? And it could just be they're just in the wrong organization, or I didn't create enough clarity for them to know what to do.
Wow, that's good. That's good. So in closing here, what's been one of the best resources for you in your business development and your personal development? One of the best resources. Could be something really practical, could be a person, could be anything.
I don't know if this is a good answer for your audience, but the first thing that popped into my head as you asked that was my brother. So like having that, I've gotten the question over the years too of like, how do you work with a sibling or how do you work with a family member? And like we don't argue. No, like of the three partners, we've never fought. We don't argue. It's just like state your opinion. Whoever makes the best case, we're gonna go with that. But the reason I mention him as a resource is because having partners where I truly believe this, that his success is more important to me than my own, and vice versa. And so having someone like that that's pushing you to that next level, like how can you be better? Can you get this done better? Can we be better? And one of our core values is continuously improving, right? And so maybe the takeaway as I'm saying this out loud to your listener is like, if you choose to have a partner in your business, they can be seen as a resource to make you better, right? Like if you have a really good partner, they're that valuable to where like they are your best resource to build the best company you can.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Wow, that's good. What would it look like for people to find out more about your company, continue to follow your guys' success?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, our website is probably the best place to find me is SNS Capital Group. So that's 3 letters like Sam, Nancy, Sam, capitalgroup.com. And there's a, contact us and those emails come to me. I'd be happy to talk to anyone. But, I also want to say I'm super appreciative of you guys and anyone who's working on the back end of the production of this podcast because gives me a platform to share my story, and I'm super appreciative of all the time and effort that you guys put into that.
Well, I do all of the editing, and I was kidding. No,
he does not.
We do have a good team. No, Jered, thank you for coming on today. I was excited to get into this episode. You're local, but then your story is also very relatable to people who are wanting to start or on the road, or even have a sizable portfolio that can probably identify with what it takes to get there. So thank you for imparting that wisdom to us today.
Yeah, no, thank you again for having me. I enjoyed sharing the story, and hopefully your audience got value from it.
Awesome, man. As always, excited that you joined us on another episode of the Reinvest Podcast. If this episode added to your tool belt or left you feeling inspired, go ahead and share it with a friend. Stay tuned every Tuesday for new episodes. And if you want to get in touch with us, go to our LinkedIn or Facebook profiles and shoot us a message. Move farther, reach higher, and grow deeper. See you next time.